I invite you to take a couple minutes and talk with 2 or 3 people around you. What did you hear that was repeated throughout those stories? What did you hear that was different? Things you might have noticed. In 2 of the versions, Mark and Matthew, the perfume is poured over Jesus' head. And in the other 2 versions, the perfume is poured on Jesus' feet. This is sort of like that highlights. Can you spot the differences? In Luke, the tears wash over the feet before the perfume, and the woman is specifically identified only in this version as a sinful woman. The concern in this version is more for the sinfulness of the person than for the wastefulness of the oil. Only Luke and John mention the woman wiping Jesus' feet with her hair. John's is the only story that identifies Judas as a speaker. Matthew and Mark refer more generally to the disciples or those gathered at the table as speaking up about the worry about the extravagance of the perfume in light of the needs of the poor. All but Luke describe Jesus' clarification that the woman is doing this or using oil that is meant to prepare his body for burial. And Mary is only named in the Gospel of John. It is possible that there was one anointing incident that developed through the tradition with slightly different details as stories were passed verbally and as the Gospel authors wrote their accounts of Jesus' life to accentuate certain theological messages. It is also possible that there were 2 or more than 2 separate anointing incidents that became conflated in various ways by some of the gospel authors, and as later authors may have used earlier written texts as a part of their written witness to Jesus' life. But regardless of its origin, and particularly focused on John's account, I wonder, what does this story, this act, show about the abundance of God's love through Jesus for us and for the world? And what does this act show about the abundance of Mary's love for Jesus? And what does this mean for us today? I think there are several important things to note about this story in the Gospel of John that are worth carrying in our minds and our hearts as we engage with this text and with each other. I'll just identify 3. First, John's version of the story is the most specific about the amount and the cost of the ointment or the perfume that Mary uses on Jesus' feet. Nearly a pound of the substance. The visual during children's time was very helpful to think about what that might look like in a container. A year's worth of wages invested. These details that John provides highlight the extravagance and the abundance of the oil, and therefore also highlight the extravagance and abundance meaningfully represented in this act. Second, John is the only gospel as I mentioned, that names the woman as Mary. This is Mary, the sister of Martha, Mary who is affirmed in the Gospel of Luke for her willingness to sit where women don't usually sit in order to listen to and internalize Jesus' teachings. This is Mary, also the sister of Lazarus, Mary who in John 11, the chapter immediately before this anointing of Jesus' feet, weeps tears of sadness and perhaps more than a small dose of frustration. Mary, who reminds Jesus that had he chosen to come and help them as soon as they had sent a message to him that Lazarus was ill, her brother would not have died. If you had been here, she weeps, this would not have happened. Mary has a history and a habit of wanting to be near Jesus, to hear Jesus, being open with her feelings, and moves Jesus more than once to an emotional and engaging response of his own. And third, as I mentioned, John carries this theme of abundance and extravagance, and he places it squarely in love and grace. From the water changing to wine at the wedding, through this story of the extravagant anointing of Jesus' feet. Mary washing Jesus' feet here foreshadows the next chapter, John 13, where Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. This is a very familiar story for our theological heritage in the Church of the Brethren, and is the foundation for our sacred love feast service, where we share fellowship and a meal together around the table, partake in the bread and cup of communion, and wash one another's feet. Typically, we focus on the understanding of this feet-washing act in service and humility towards one another, and yes, that is absolutely true. But I wonder how viewing through the lens of chapter 12, Mary's act, affects or even enhances the way we view chapter 13. How might we see Jesus washing his disciples' feet differently if we look through the eyes of Mary washing Jesus' feet, as the earliest hearers and readers of this text would have been prompted to do? How might we think about our own moments of washing one another's feet, both very literally as well as figuratively, when we consider the depth of meaning and emotion and commitment involved in Mary's act? Service and humility, yes, but also an extravagance of joy, hope, faith, peace, understanding, even in the face of challenge, disappointment, fear, apprehension, grief. This isn't the prosperity gospel that says, just agree to follow Jesus and wealth and riches will be yours. This is the abundance gospel that says life in Jesus provides more than we can humanly imagine. What are we willing or not willing to abundantly give? And what are we willing or not willing to abundantly receive? Yesterday, Dakota and Mariah and I were at Target, purchasing some last-minute items before heading to the airport to pick up Teresa, our new family member who just arrived from Germany. She will be with us for the next several months and will be an exchange student in the United States. When you are cleaning your house and preparing to host someone for a while, the Target list grows quickly. And given the timing in August and the ages of the kids that were with me, it looked to the cashier as if we were buying things for back to school, which was sort of true, but we shared with her that we were preparing to host an exchange student. And she began to share with us her story of coming to the United States from Colombia 20 years ago, of finally satisfying her dream of going to college and graduating 2 years ago. She now works as a court interpreter, but she continues to work at Target on the weekends. She said it is her Disneyland. As tears sprung to her eyes and her voice choked up, she described how grateful she is for the job at Target that enabled her to fulfill her dream, and how thankful she is when she arrives for each work shift. She told us how joyful she feels when she sees families coming through her checkout line, excited children, and loving parents. She shared her deep faith in humanity and her assurance that we are best cared for when we care for each other. And she repeatedly apologized for crying, but said they are tears of joy. And she gets very emotional when she sees people caring for others, as she has also been cared for, and so obviously in our interaction cares deeply for others. The conversation was an extravagant offering from her heart. She didn't offer to pay for our bill, and nor would I have suggested that she should have. Neither of us bent down at checkout counter 6 to pour perfume from the cosmetics aisle onto someone else's feet. No one chastised us for chatting too long and holding up the line. But it was a moment of deep connection, and in some ways, it felt like we were anointed by her tears and her smile. Extravagant and abundant service. Extravagant and abundant humility. Extravagant and abundant hospitality. Think about what that looks like for you. Extravagant and abundant gratitude. Extravagant and abundant love. May we keep our eyes and our hearts open to opportunities to both give and receive such extravagance and abundance, to and from the Holy One who surrounds us in each moment, to and from those we know well and care for deeply, and to and from those with whom we feel tension or strangers. May it be so.